All right, everybody, thank you for sticking with us, and we're already at the last session. Time is really flying. Now, this was actually the most popular session for the virtual or for the physical VDI Performance Summit we did in Amsterdam. So I'm very happy that we can have Blair here, and he's, of course, has some updated content in his slides. He's done so much research that I can't take too much of his time for an introduction. I do want to ask, because in Amsterdam, I used to introduce people and we were asking them questions about what they had on their LinkedIn profile. Now, if you have questions about Exchange 2003, Server 2003, and Solaris, please hit up Blair, because according to his LinkedIn profile, that's what he's a specialist in. So Blair, I guess you must love your job as you've not updated your LinkedIn for so long. So on that, have fun, man.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, I should probably update that. But, you know, I'd rather be working on Windows Virtual Desktop than updating my LinkedIn profile. I'm sure WVD would make a nice addition to that as well. It has been a lot of fun. So let's get started without further ado. This session is definitely going to be about WVD and some of the groundbreaking performance that we've observed during a lot of the testing that we've done. Now, I'm working from home. I've shared my desktop experience and what my desktop looks like at home. Happy if you would share yours too and just include the hashtag VDI Summit. So let's talk a little bit about what we've done. So first of all, being here at Login VSI and doing testing, you know, we love to break things and we love to test new things and of course love to tell you all about it. Now, anytime we get into something, typically we're being asked by our customers and by a lot of people that we work with, you know, what's the latest on this new hype that's been going on, and tell us more about it. So hype is definitely where we at Login VSI spend a lot of our time. Sometimes that's debunking myths or actually proving them. And then, of course, we love trying new things. And there are definitely, there have been lots of new things, but I have to say nothing has been quite as new and groundbreaking as WVD has been. And that's what we're going to jump into today. Now, if you listened to Peter and Stefan's session earlier today, you probably heard that 95% of Windows Virtual Desktop deployments so far have been Windows 10 Enterprise Multi-Session. Now, I don't think that's any big surprise. I am, I guess, quite surprised to see that it's actually as high as 95%. Really cool. I think it used to be 98% at one point in time, but I know this is very appealing to a lot of folks, especially now with a lot of the changes in how we work remotely. Now, we also did some of this testing because we collaborate quite closely with Microsoft, so Peter and his team. And then there's always a lot to learn. So this is why we do things here at Login VSI and why we paid particular attention to Windows Virtual Desktop and Windows 10 Enterprise Multi-Session. Now, of course, jumping into something as groundbreaking as this, it certainly has a different type of test method than things that we know about. So let's take a look at what was tested. Windows 10 Enterprise Multi-Session definitely is the focus here. And we did start with Office 365 Pro Plus and Windows 10 version 1903. Now, we changed Office 365 Pro Plus to Office 2019 Standard. That had a lot to do with being able to use volume licensing to license some of our Office applications so they could be used in our workloads. Currently working on trying to figure out ways to do some of that testing with Office 365 and some of the activation they have there. But in the meantime, Office 2019 was a perfect substitute for us. The other thing we looked at a couple of different instances, the NVIDIA enabled NV series, and we also looked at the D series standard offerings. Now, we didn't spend a whole lot of time on the NVIDIA sessions instances, but we will be spending some more time on that in the coming months. We did very much focus on the D series, and the focus of our investigations was the D16S V3. The S for premium storage, V3 for the processor version. And of course, when we're doing anything server-based compute or VDI, we tend to focus on the latest and greatest processors as much as we can. And also work through, as we typically do when we test, we optimize our images to get the best performance out of them. So let's take a look at how this was tested as we kind of move forward. Now, in the traditional sense, we have always done capacity load testing with Login VSI. That's been kind of our go-to. It's an industry standard. And when it comes to continuous testing, we used Login PI. But as you may have seen over the past months, we've updated our product Login PI to what we call Login Enterprise. Now, the exciting thing about Login Enterprise is it also now in one platform includes the ability to do both capacity and continuous testing. And you can expect that our future investigations are going to be based on Login Enterprise. And if you stick around until the end of the session, we have another announcement about Login Enterprise, so stay tuned there. Now let's take a quick look at the Login BSI architecture that we used for Windows 10 Enterprise Multi-Session in WVD. So we tested with everything pretty much in the same Azure Virtual Network and in the same region, US East 2. We had the Login BSI management server installed in there. We had 3 launchers that we used, and we had the Windows 10 Enterprise multi-session host. You can see the specs for each of those instances. Nothing really major for the VSI server there or the launchers. And as we move forward into Login Enterprise, it's simply a virtual appliance instead of the Login VSI server. So that's quite nice. And then we had a bunch of session users that will log into that session host to help us stress test that. And of course, with everything, we have an Active Directory domain server installed in there. Again, all on the same Azure Virtual Network. Now, as we look at some of the findings that we have as we've been doing a lot of this testing, there are a number of factors that we will pay attention to that help us to determine where the sweet spot in testing is and where we think the performance curve is when it comes to the number of sessions per host. We look at baseline. That basically tells us about the base image performance. So if I only have a couple sessions on my session host, I'm pretty much going to be getting the best of all the CPU and memory from that host. So that's what we call our baseline performance. Lower is better than in this case. VSI max is the point at which we feel user experience will degrade when you oversaturate a server. So we're looking for the most sessions that we can get on a host. Login performance is always something that we focus on and is critical. And login performance is basically measured in how many seconds it takes for me to get to my desktop. And then lastly, profile performance, which is what happens when I log in with new profiles versus existing profiles, and then disk I/O. Disk is always a factor when it comes to session or VDI-based solutions. So as you can see, we did a lot of tests. And let's just leave it at that. There's no need to pour through all of the numbers in this table. A lot of testing was done on the D16 SV3 to kind of find out how many sessions can we get with a standard knowledge worker on that instance with the Windows 10 Enterprise Multi-Session. And a lot of testing is what we had to do to figure out, where or how many sessions can we get on that host. And we tested up to 160. Now, I can tell you that typically where we started with multi-session, in a lot of the bare metal testing that we've done on the server-based session host, we tend to look at the rule of 5 and 10. 5 for VDI, so that's 5 users per core in VDI, or that's 10 sessions per core on a session host of bare metal. That's usually where we start, and then we see, are we kind of above that number or below that number? And what I found was it was quite different than our standard sizing guidance that we use. Now, from a baseline perspective, we did see that we got the best baselines after we optimized the image. I did leave OneDrive and Cortana enabled. These are essential now to Windows 10 Enterprise Multi-Session, and we don't want to disable those. There are some other critical services too that as an enterprise I would leave enabled. But with the system, we saw non-optimized as high as about 1,969 milliseconds, and that's pretty slow. We typically like to see closer to the 1,500 millisecond range. And then we also suppressed app readiness. App readiness is a service within Windows 10 that helps to prepare your applications for first-time use, and we'll cover a little bit more of that in later slides. And then we got our best VSI max again after optimization. We know that Microsoft's working on making sure that the images that they use are heavily optimized before. So there may be a point at which that we won't have to really run through too much optimization. And Peter and Stefan provided some information earlier that give us hope that, that they're providing us with optimized images for the instances that we're using, which is great. Multi-user OneDrive is also something that comes out of the box with the Windows 10 Enterprise Multi-Session on the latest version. So pay attention to that. That helps a lot with the overhead created by OneDrive. Now, when we did our first testing and looked at baselines, again, this is how responsive the system is when it's being fired off with the first test. And typically this will tell us something about how well the image has been optimized. A lower baseline is better. And we saw that we could get up to about 45 users and still maintain a pretty low baseline. 45 was a pretty good number for us. If we got higher, then we saw the baselines increase fairly dramatically. Now, we did find that the baselines didn't go too crazy, anywhere between 40 and 60. So if you remember, we started at about 160 sessions was our target based on the rule of 5 and 10. You can quickly see that with Windows 10 Enterprise Multi-Session, this number is now shifted to a much lower than we would have expected based upon our old data. But there's nothing to say that 40 and 60 is a bad number, right? Windows 10 Enterprise Multi-Session is definitely a new thing out in the industry, and is going to perform different than what our expectations are. So I wouldn't consider that bad by any means at this point. Now, from a VSI Max perspective, we're looking at how many sessions can we get on this instance before we start to saturate the system. And we got about 50 users or so, and we saw our best VSI Max. We got about 47 sessions on the host. At about 60 or 55, again, we saw that we were within the sweet spot where we got a good VSI Max. So I think for the purpose of, kind of looking at the numbers so far, 47 seems to be about the right number for this D16 SV3. All right, so the scalability rules are changing here right in front of our eyes. Okay. Now, another thing we looked at was login performance. And again, how many seconds does it take for us to log in a certain number of users within a particular amount of time? And it's a great indicator of how saturated our system is. The more saturated the system is, the slower it's going to be. It's got to go through a number of things like building new profiles if you have new users, a lot of startup processes. Again, remember, we're dealing with a client operating system and not a server operating system. It's much richer. So there are a lot more startup processes that prepare that first-time experience. And then perhaps layering technologies, they can also impact login performance. So there are a lot of things that we look at to determine a system's performance. And as we can see here, at about 50, 55 users, logon performance was below 10 seconds, or it was 10 seconds or less, which is really good. That's about where we'd want to see it. But we can see after about 60 that number really started to increase. And that's how we know that we're kind of oversaturating that server and want to be careful about getting to numbers that are too much higher than, let's just say, around 55. So from a login performance perspective, we'll call 55 our kind of spot. So now we have this nice sweet spot between 47 sessions and 55 sessions, okay? So we're already learning a great deal, and we had to do a lot of testing just to figure out where that sweet spot was. Now, there was another very interesting effect that we saw that I thought would be good to share with you, and that's the difference between a new user profile and existing user profile. So, what happens if we've got a persistent user, and after logging in once, a lot of that state exists that allows them to log in faster the next time. So we definitely would see a peak in performance demand anytime a new user was logging in and that profile was being prepared. And in this case, I wanted to get more users on there because I wanted to build more profiles. So I used a task user for this one, or task worker for this one. And when all of them had to create new profiles, we saw about 31 sessions max before we started to hit our VSI max. And so certainly you can see the effect that all of those sessions and profiles being created has on the system. Now, if we took these same users and we logged in all of them and then reran this test, how different would that number look with all the profiles created in a persistent fashion? And we saw it was quite different, almost double. So with the established users who had, were more stateful and had a persistent profile, let's say, we could see that we got about 58 sessions before we bottomed out the CPU. This is a much better number and really gives us a great view into the difference between an existing user and a new user. It also tells us about how important it's going to be to have profile management and technologies like FS Logics to help us with some of that profile, kind of moving the profile around and being remote with those. And here, as you can simply see, the effect that logging in just 5 new users has, right? If I had all existing users and then I logged in some new ones, you can see this little spike in the CPU performance that we have here. Everything else correlated to that pretty much, including disk writes. So definitely a very interesting effect there. Okay, so let's move on. Speaking of disks, this was another very interesting revelation that I found when doing this testing. I would look at the number of write IOs versus read IOs that each session had. And I could see on this machine that that's hosting all of these sessions that I had an extreme amount of write IOs. In fact, it was about 200 to 1. So 200 times higher than write IOPS than read IOPS. That's an extreme difference. It tells you that a lot of the stuff that's on the system is being written, or a lot of the things that we're putting on the system is just a heavy write environment. Now, coming from a storage background, I know that when you're doing writes, they're very sensitive to latency. So because writes are so sensitive to latency, because we need to get that information down to its disk, definitely recommend using SSD. Don't think of using anything different. So premium SSD is what I used for this, and would definitely recommend that. And we'll look at other storage optimization technologies for these types of instances. The other thing that I noticed that is no longer a problem that I would like to draw your attention to is that I was using Office 2019, and I was using a version of Office 2019 that was less than 1906. We had an issue where some of our file write times were higher than expected. And this was caused by something that was in Office before the 1906 update. So if you update to something greater than 1906 for Office 2019 or Office 365, then there's a good chance you're not going to see this. And the way that it shows itself is that when you have anything less than 1906 installed, you're going to see these transient performance spikes. They look really weird. They cause your averaged index to appear a little bumpy, and can cause your VSI max to be hit much earlier than you would expect. So if you are seeing these transient performance spikes, look at your Office version and get it updated, and I'm sure they'll go away. And then lastly, we looked at continuous testing. This is really important because I want to know if I'm using a cloud resource. I want to be able to determine, are other instances that are noisy affecting me? Is a regional data center performing differently than other regional data centers? Is it time-based, based upon how users behave during the day? And so what we did was we looked at the performance of these Azure instances over the course of the day. And it really looked pretty good. If you look at what you see here in front of you, the heavy loads do stand out, but this was an artificial load that I created using login VSI. So I just wanted to see how that differential looked when I applied more pressure to the system. And this is a reason why you want a continuous test, because you don't know what's going to cause that pressure throughout the day. It could be an update, could be a user acting differently, could be a lot of different things. And as you can see in the graphs here, it had an effect on logins. It also had an effect on application responsiveness. And again, this is the Login Enterprise product that we're talking about that is capable of doing continuous testing. And then if you look during the normal day, you can see that we started pretty much at midnight here. But then as things kind of rolled out throughout the day, things really kind of leveled out nicely. I didn't see any different types of performance impacts that might have been caused by noisy neighbors or anything like that. So all looks pretty good there. So of all of this testing that we've done, there's definitely some lessons that we've learned, and let's take you through some of those. Now, scalability, again, we had some assumptions about what we should expect versus what we saw. Now, VSI max again was a 47. So 47 sessions that we got on this D16 SP3 before we started to hit the VSI max. Next was the login performance. Again, we hit about 55. So again, we're kind of seeing that sweet spot. So if we look at a sizing formula to start with, and again, this guidance is going to change depending on whether you have other applications installed, what kind of users are being used in your environment. All of this can change. But it's really good to have a place to start. And I feel like a sizing formula that we have here is, I'd say, around a rule of 2 or 3, but no more than 4 in this case. Now, of course, that can change as we have new technologies like MSIX, App Attach, and other things that we're using. But for now, you know, if you're looking for a good place to start, let's start with the rule of two or three. You can always go up from there, but it can save you time by at least knowing where to start instead of like me starting at about 160 sessions and not doing so hot. There was another really interesting observation that I saw too during this testing, and that's what I call steady state. Steady state, in my definition, is basically what happens after everybody gets logged in and the services in Windows 10 quiet down, these services that are used to provide that great initial experience for users that have just logged in. So after that really heavy peak saturation, primarily with CPU, after that settles down for a little bit, then the system starts to stabilize and you start to see a much more, you know, averaged out, a much more even type of workflow and resource utilization that you would normally see during that deep login period. And it's kind of highlighted here by what you're seeing in some of these areas where CPU average goes from a peak of about 85 down to somewhere around 60. You can see it in these other graphs where things settle down again after that peak login rate. So why do I think this is important? Well, if I just look at VSI Max, then I'm looking at, you know, maybe a system saturation at about 47 sessions per host. If I look at the steady state, I'm looking more at 55. Again, the 55 number keeps coming up and looks pretty good. So let's do a little math based upon the cost of these instances. And if we look at that, then we're looking at, and this is based on the rates that we have for Azure for this region. And if you look at it, and these are some old numbers, so they haven't been updated with the current to reflect the current cost. But if you look at it relative to each other, for one user, it costs a difference of about $4 per month, right? $26 versus $22. If you look at that over a year, the numbers start to look a little bit bigger, $316 versus $270 per year. Let's scale that out to 1,000 users, right? And then you're looking at a difference of about $46,000 per 1,000 users per year. So you're already looking at an opportunity to save a little cost depending on how you go about your sizing and things like that. So I think that's a very important consideration as you start looking at how do I want to scale out? How do I want to load balance? How do I want to deploy my sessions across my pool of Windows 10 session hosts? So definitely something that I would highly recommend that you pay attention to as you look at doing this for yourselves. Now, login intervals is another thing that we paid particular attention to. Login intervals here are basically how quickly do we have one user logging in after another user. This can be referred to sometimes as a login storm where those intervals are very compressed. So what I did was I looked at the difference between a 30-second login interval and a 5-second login interval. I realized that we don't have a whole lot of control at how often or how quickly these users are logging in. And you saw earlier the effect that logins have on the performance of the system. You can see the baselines just went through the roof at a 5-second interval versus a more moderate at about 30-second interval. Now, I'm not suggesting that you try and tailor your user logins and force them to log in within a 30-second interval, but I do want you to be aware of the effect that having them log in too closely to each other, I want you to kind of realize the effect that can have on your environment. Again, I do see future technologies like MSIX, AppAttach, and FSLogix as having the ability to kind of bring that down a little bit. But remember, we're dealing with a client operating system, has a very rich set of startup services that do demand resources from a lot of the hosts that are hosting those sessions. So very important to note there. Now, some other notable information that was important for our test: OneDrive per machine. So having OneDrive installed on the machine that is used by all users for all sessions can definitely keep down the demand that you see on your session hosts. If you've looked at any of our VSI testing in the past, you've seen that we typically disable OneDrive to really get a feel for that, the high performance or the max sessions that we can get on a server. So OneDrive per machine is definitely a step in the right direction, and thanks to Microsoft, we're seeing the benefits of that in terms of our overall performance. App readiness is another service. So this is one that will prepare applications for first-time use. Basically, it's looking at how do I cut down the amount of time it takes for my user to start their application for the first time. It can either start right away or maybe take a couple of seconds to start, and that's what the app readiness service does. For our testing, we looked at, because we're sharing this client OS with many users, that compounds itself and starts to cause a lot of demand from the system. So you can see this registry setting here, first logon delay, and we set that to a very large number, so we didn't really feel that during our testing. And I really don't think having to wait a couple extra seconds for an application to start is all that bad anyway. And then you heard Stefan and Peter talk about AppX. AppX is used for installing, registering, updating applications, Windows Store applications. And this also does have an impact and is part of that rich client OS experience. It can take some resource from the session host. And you can also watch it if you're looking at your task manager and watching services. You'll see it show up as AppX service. And you can see all the AppX services that are being started for the sessions that are being created. So some things of note to keep your eye on. And then of course Teams. I didn't do any particular testing on Teams, but Teams is definitely something to pay attention to. And again, if you go back to the WVD session by Stefan and Peter, they did talk about some cool capabilities in offloading audio and video for Teams. So would definitely take a look at that and trying to reduce the resource consumption on these hosts. So this is a big part of all of the Windows Virtual Desktop, Windows 10 Enterprise multi-session information that I wanted to provide to you. Hope you found it to be very useful. I am going to continue to do more of this testing with Windows Virtual Desktop, and we'll share some of these new findings. I do know that this has been on the market really, I think, as GA since last September. So there isn't a whole lot of performance information out there. So I'd encourage all of you to share any information that you might be seeing. Let's collectively as a community share information so that we know how Windows 10 looks, Windows 10 Enterprise Multi-Session looks in the performance community. So I do have a couple of other things. Now, we do have a special announcement I talked about earlier. And that special announcement has to do a lot with our product called Enterprise, Login Enterprise. So we are going to be releasing Login Enterprise 4.1 next week. And this is going to include application compatibility testing. The cool part about this is now Login Enterprise can do load testing. It can do continuous testing from a business continuity perspective. And now it can do application compatibility testing. And I do kind of like to look at it in a kind of a clockwork way, right? So if I do have a new image I want to test, I'm probably going to want to test the compatibility of that application with, let's say, a Windows 10 update. After I do that, I can load test it to see how much more resource consumption that Windows 10 update causes. And then, of course, when I get into production, I'm going to want to do a continuous test of these images and this environment while my production system is running. This will help me kind of find out, are things changing again from a regional perspective? Are there noisy neighbors, things of that perspective? So I think it's really important to kind of go through this change management process. And now you have one application suite that can do that all for you. Just one virtual appliance, one install, and you're good to go. So I would like to give you a quick demo of this. So I'm going to flip over to my environment really quick and give you a quick view of this. So what you can see here is my continuous testing. I have a number of different remote environments that are being continuously tested. And what I want to do is jump over to the new capability. And so you can see here in our manage test dialog that we have the continuous tests that are set up. We have the load testing that's set up and application testing. And this is the new stuff. So I'll quickly jump into here and you can see we can create different types of connectors that can be Microsoft RDS, it can be NetScaler, Storefront, custom connectors, Horizon View, you name it. And we connect to our environment and we have a number of options that we can use. And then we also create a number of user accounts or a group of user accounts, a group of launchers that we can use for this testing. Once you do that, you can enable a number of report settings, and I'll show you a report real quick, and this will only take a couple of minutes. And then I add my applications that I want to be compatibility tested every time I run through this test script. And it's as easy as adding, just adding an application from your applications that you have a catalog of. Very easy to add applications to. No scripting required to do an application start. So we're talking very easy, very quick to get this type of stuff done. So, and then you have the ability to add login information to your report and latency for the connections. And then I'm going to set thresholds as well. If it takes longer for my applications to start, I want to know about it. Now, after you get that set up, it's as easy, firing off the test is as easy as, oops, that's the load testing one. I don't want to do that one. I want to do application testing. So firing off the application test is as easy as clicking the start button and confirming that the way you set it up is how you want to run the test. And after it confirms everything's good, it's going to start the test. You can see the test here. Now you can see on my Windows 10 desktop, it's going to be starting the application compatibility test. And you can see the virtual user getting logged in and started up. Now you're going to see this test happen pretty quick. What it's going to do is run through the number of Office applications that have been configured. Word, it's going to open Word. It's going to also time how long does it take to open Word. And then it's going to move on very quickly to the next application, which is going to be Microsoft Excel. And then the third application, PowerPoint. Right, so you can see how quickly and easy and quick and easy it is to test applications. And then lastly, what we're going to take a look at is an EMR application that I have in my environment. So this one involves some interactions with the application. So I might not just want to look at application starts, but I also want to see, do interactions slow down after the compatibility test is done? So after this virtual user walks through all of these tests that it's doing and these interactions that it's timing, it's going to generate a report for us. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back here, and you can see that we've had some measurements that are slower than expected. So that's good. I want to know what those are. So after the test is done, it's going to generate a report after logging in the user. So I have a report that's already been created here that we can take a look at. And we'll just jump in here and open up this report. Actually, I'm going to open up a more recent one. Let's open up this one right here. Okay, so you can see that I get information. Did any of my applications fail? No. Well, that's a great first step in knowing whether your applications are compatible or not. I do see that some of them slowed down though, and I want to check out more information about that. My login performance and latency was a little slower than expected. You can see my thresholds here with the red lines. And you get a little configuration information and notes if you have them. So here's where you get the summary. Everything started up great. My interactions were good, but I see Excel had an issue. Let me jump to that. And I can see that while it opened just fine, and I can tell by that first time screen that it was successful, I can see that the actual startup time was, well, you know, not that much slower. It was only about 24 milliseconds slower than I would expect. So, you know, that's actually not too bad at all. So I'm really happy with the results of this test, and I can consider this compatibility test done, right? So really good stuff here, and a really quick and easy way to determine are my images compatible or are my applications compatible with my new image before I go and load test. So that's the application compatibility feature that's new in Windows, in Login Enterprise. Now that I've had some time to introduce you to our new product, I think we're kind of waiting for the raffle here, and I'm sure we've got a lot of people that are interested to know if they've won the raffle. So let's get on with that. I'm sure you're excited. So we've got a few different raffles. We've got one by ourselves, Login VSI, for some Apple AirPods. Liquidware has an Amazon Echo Show, and Tintree has a Garmin Vivo Fit that they're going to give away to a couple of their attendees. iGel and Tenzig both have some great prizes as well, but they're going to announce their winners by getting in touch with you after the event. So let me pull up my, I'm going to reach my hand into the virtual winner bucket, the virtual ticket bucket. And the first winner that we have for Login VSI's AirPods is Jerome Belden from BCBST. That sounds like a familiar name. Jerome, thanks for joining us today, and hope you enjoy those AirPods. We'll be in touch with you very soon. Okay, Liquidware with the Amazon Echo Show. We have a winner there, and that winner is Scott Strain. Scott Strain from E-Trade Financial. Scott, thanks for joining us today and certainly earned this great prize. Thanks, Liquidware, for providing that one for us. And then lastly, with Tin Tree giving away the Garmin Vivo Fit 4, we have 2 names there. And let's see here. Those names are, let me reach my hand in there. And yeah, you're welcome, Scott. Those 2 names are Scott Powers from TBK Bank. Scott, thanks for joining us. And Emma Beckers from Wells Fargo. Thanks for joining us, Emma. This has been such a pleasure being able to spend time with all of you today. And it's been my absolute pleasure, you know, introducing you and kind of being able to hang out with you and moderate the sessions. Mark, it's been a ton of fun doing this with you all day.
Absolutely.
So you got any words?
Yeah, no, I mean, we couldn't be more further apart, I guess. I mean, you're in the south of America, more or less, and I'm in Amsterdam, and everybody is at home. It was just so much fun. I'm just glad nothing exploded. No, Zoom didn't melt. They're already overloaded. The platform held. All the attendees were there. Everybody was joining from home. The sponsor sessions, the virtual booths were alive and kicking. There's still a lot of discussion going on, and it's a fun place to hang out. So honestly, guys, all of the attendees, thank you very much. All of the sponsors, thank you very much for taking care of us again and for the great prizes. And I think we should do this again soon, Blair.
Yep. I think we love doing our physical sessions in Amsterdam, and I think we'll be doing more virtual sessions next year too. This is just, yeah, like you said, a lot of fun. I look forward to doing these, and I know you do too.
Cool. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining the 2nd online Virtual VDI Performance Summit, or the 4th VDI Performance Summit in total. We hope to see you again next time, and goodbye. Cheers.
Goodbye. See ya.